Chapter 25, Production and Growth, in 25 minutes or less. Specifically, this is what we're going to cover in 25. We're going to cover what are the facts about living standards and growth rates around the world. We're going to learn why productivity matters for living standards. We're going to be able to figure out what determines productivity and drives growth. And we're going to figure out how politicians can affect growth and living standards. All that in just 25 minutes. Here we go. This is a picture of a typical family in the UK. If you live in the UK, you live in a country where GDP per capita is quite high. It's $36,000. That means their economic pie, when it gets divided up into how many people they have, is equal to $36,000. What that corresponds with is a lot of stuff. The typical person in the UK has a lot of stuff to their name, and that matters. Stuff matters. Why? Excuse me here as I choke. Because that means you're probably going to live a long life. 80 years on average in the UK. And you're probably going to be pretty well educated. In the UK, 99% of their people can read. We're going to, in Chapter 25, explain how this came to be. And furthermore, we're going to be able to explain why, if you live in Mexico, you live differently than you do in the UK. Not just, what your diet looks like, not just what kind of things you do for fun. That's all well and good, but if you look here at what the typical Mexican has, they have stuff worth less than in the UK. GDP per capita is less than half what it is in the UK. With that, shorter lives by 4 years, less educational attainment. Why is there a difference between life in Mexico and life in the UK? We're going to do that here in Chapter 25. But we're not going to stop there, because difference in the world doesn't just go the UK to Mexico. You could then look at other countries like Mali, who are much less well off than people in Mexico or the UK, where you have very little stuff to your name, $1,000 GDP per capita, very short life, 52 years on average, and very little educational attainment. All of these things, explaining them, that's going to be covered here in Chapter 25. So let's go. We covered 3 countries there, and we depicted them. This chart covers 12 to 15, and you can see here, this is a snapshot of where these countries are at in 2009 when this data was produced. You have countries like the United States and Singapore who are very well off, and you have countries like Chad and Rwanda who are quite poor. But that's really not the complete picture. We want to understand, yes, where countries are starting today. That tells us who's in need, and it tells us who's doing well and who might be looked at for kind of a template for how the world can become better. But we want to also look at growth rates. Over on the right side we see that's where the economies of the world here are going. And that's just as important as where they're at right now. You can see Rwanda is not doing well and Chad is not doing well. But what is perhaps more alarming is where they're going, or rather not going. These are economies that are not growing rapidly. If they were, they could be able to turn around their circumstances. Take what is $1,000 today and make it $2,000 next year, or $10,000 in a decade or so. But it doesn't look like they're going anywhere fast, and we want to understand how we might be able to encourage those economies to grow so that they get themselves out of this impoverished states. And if you looked at that, chart, if I would have showed you the snapshot of the world in 1960, you would have seen Singapore in the same state as Chad and Rwanda. They had incomes that were quite low in 1960, but they've done things, they've taken steps to get themselves out of that trap. They were not stuck there. They have transformed their country. So there is hope for those in the world who find themselves impoverished. They can tomorrow be better off than they were today. They just have to take the right steps. And there's got to be people helping them along the way. And then the little cautionary tale here. If you are a rich country today, that doesn't mean you're going to be a rich country tomorrow. 500 years ago, China was on top of the world. And in 2000, they certainly weren't. Societies evolve. Some surpass others. So don't sit on your loins here. Don't grow complacent. If you are a rich country, figure out how you became rich and then keep doing those things. That's what we're going to do here in 25. The beauty of 25 is that I think it is useful from a country and from an individual standpoint. We're going to be able to answer all these questions. Take a look, process them, and then let's go about answering them. So we said, why are there some rich countries and others who are quite poor? There is one word. People in the rich world are more productive. That doesn't mean anything about innate ability. That just means their circumstances make them more productive than their person that we're comparing them to. So productivity really determines standard of living. If you want to be more productive, that's another way of saying you want to live a more comfortable life, because they are really one and the same. So we're going to have a technical definition here of productivity, the absolute most important word in today's presentation. We're going to say the letter Y stands for real GDP, which is another way of saying that is our nation's output. And L is the quantity of labor. That's how many people are doing the work. If we get Y per L, which is output per worker, going up, our society is moving in the right direction. So we want to move it as quickly as we can upwards. We want to get more productivity out of our workers. Let's figure out how we can do that. So that is really explaining why certain countries are richer than others, because some are more productive, thus they have higher real GDPs, and thus they have higher incomes. Remember, there is a relationship between these two. Income is really what you've been able to produce, so real GDP, or a nation's output, is really a nation's income. So rich nations are very productive. If you are growing rapidly in terms of productivity, you're also going to be growing rapidly in living standards. So the question then is, how can we grow rapidly? How can Chad and Rwanda turn around their countries and make them more like Mexico, and then one day more like the United States? First way, there's going to be 4 of them. Don't forget these. First thing is, we just add more physical capital. That's a technical phrase that you have to be comfortable with in AP Econ. We want to see this happening. Don't forget this phrase. We want to see physical capital accumulating. If we see physical capital accumulating, or if it is accumulating more rapidly than it did in the past, you're going to see that society grow. Productivity is going to rise. So the technical definition is the amount of capital per worker. If it grows, the amount of capital per worker, we're going to see that economy grow rapidly because they're going to be more productive. That means we have more machines and more equipment doing work at a more efficient and rapid rate. That's the first way that our economies can be driven forward. But that's not the only way. The second way here is human capital. Human capital is knowledge and skills that workers are going to acquire when they are sitting here in school. You're welcome. Hold on as somebody gives an announcement here. I'll continue in just a second.
If we have any writing center tutors in the building, please come to...
We have plenty of time. We're only 7 minutes in. We got another 18.
Real bad. Thanks.
So we get education, we get training, we get on-the-job experience. All those things are going to make us more productive citizens. Education is worthwhile, not just for your benefit, but for society's benefit. If we get greater amounts of human capital per worker, we get a more productive society. More productive means higher standards of living. That's the second way that we can grow as an economy. The third way, and this is the least significant of them, is to have more natural resources. Things like oil, coal, iron ore. Those are things, natural resources, that get turned into final products. If you have more, if they're easier to get to, then all other things held constant, you're going to be a more productive society. There's one country that's a very good example of this. Saudi Arabia sits on vast deposits of oil. As a result, most of their citizens lead relatively comfortable lives. Not as comfortable as here in the United States, but definitely more comfortable than, say, in Chad or Rwanda. But that doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. Countries like Japan are not resource rich. They are instead resource poor. But they are very, very productive. Why? Physical capital is prioritized. A lot of machines at work in Japan. The Japanese are quite smart. Their education system is, as good as any other. And their citizens are very productive because of that education. And then the last thing here, the Japanese invent and they innovate. And this is, studies are showing the most important driver of growth. If you get better technology or better processes in place, you as a society are going to be more productive. So technological knowledge or technological progress is embodied by the understanding of the best ways to produce goods and services. That means faster computers, smaller cell phones, and better TVs. But it also means better processes. So don't just think in terms of things that we're using. Also think in terms of the processes. So don't forget about these, because this is arguably the most important driver of growth. Those 4 things combined push your economy forward, make your life more comfortable tomorrow than it is today. Don't forget it. Now, you might be confused about what's the difference between technological knowledge and human capital. It's quite simple. The technology is the computer. That's a physical thing or a process. And then we as humans aren't just born with that knowledge. The process of the assembly line, we don't know how to organize ourselves like that when we are born. Nor do we know how to use the computer when we are born. We learn those skills. So human capital is really the effort that is expended to acquire the knowledge that already exists. So they are different but related. Both drive productivity and growth. Now, in the last 12 or so minutes, what we're going to do is figure out how politicians can put in place policies that help drive growth, drive productivity, and thus make our life more comfortable. Here we go. What we say is, obviously, if we get more capital, we're going to be more productive. So that means we need more investments. This is not buying stocks and bonds. Instead, investment spending is when businesses, firms, are buying physical capital. So now remember, I just said that we're talking now in the second half of this presentation about how politicians can drive growth. How can they get people doing this? How can they get firms buying physical capital? Well, there's two ways that they can do it. And the first way is they make investment spending more attractive. And there's two ways that they can do this. The first way is they can offer tax credits. The second way is they can offer subsidies. Both act in the same fashion. Let's just go with this example. I'm not a farmer, so I have no idea how much this stuff actually costs, but let's just say you want a new tractor, and that tractor is massive, and I think it's a pretty good guess to say that that's going to cost you maybe a couple $100,000. A brand new, huge tractor that's plowing that enormous field that you have, maybe $200,000–300,000. So let's call it $200,000. That's a very expensive piece of equipment. If you buy the best tractor, or if farmers have more tractors, okay, we're going to say that they're going to be more productive. Our society is going to be more productive. So what we want is them to go out and do that. But how can we make that purchase a little bit more attractive? We need to change their incentives. We need to bring down the cost. Well, the government can do that. If the government wants more investment spending, it can offer a tax credit. It can say, when you go out and buy that machine, write that off on your taxes. So write off $50,000 of that expense on your taxes, so that your tax burden maybe goes down by $10,000. Now that meant you bought a $200,000 machine, but when your taxes were filed, the government gives you back something that was, $10,000. So in effect, it only cost you $190,000. All things held constant, if it's $190,000, more people are going to go out and buy that tractor. We're going to be more efficient or more productive as a society. A subsidy would work in the same way. Just the return would happen quicker. This is, you go out and buy that $200,000 machine, and the government says, when you do, I'm going to immediately write you a $10,000 check, effectively making that purchase $190,000. All things held constant, people go out and buy more machines, we got more investment spending, the government drove growth. But I said that was the first way that they could do it. The second way that they could do this is they could change people's decisions with respect to saving. Okay? So we need to understand that there is a relationship between investment spending and saving. Firms are going to buy those pieces of equipment, that $200,000 machine, with borrowed money. They need more money to borrow if they're going to, or they need more money to borrow if they're going to make these new purchases. So if we can get more savings out there, then that's freeing up more funds for firms to use those savings and engage in this capital investment. So how can the government increase savings? Well, here's our example. We still have 10 minutes, so don't fret. Let's say that you're saving in your savings account. And one of the reasons you put it there is you earn interest, 2%. But unfortunately, when you earn 2% annually, the government is going to take a portion of it. And they really do this. The government taxes interest earned on savings. Let's just say that they charged 1% in terms of tax. They took a percent of that 2 that you earned. Well, that means that now you actually only got to keep 1% of that increase in your savings. You saved $100, you got 102 back, but unfortunately you had to give 1 to the government, so you only made $1. You earned 1% interest. Well, how can the government incentivize more saving? Well, they can change this. They can say when you save, and let's just say you're earning 2%, instead of taking a full percent, we'll only take 0.5. That lets you keep 1.5%, and with your keeping more money, you're going to do more saving. We just changed your incentives. And what then does that do? That frees up a lot of funds for those capital and investment projects. Now our society has more capital. With more capital, we are more productive. Those are a couple of ways that we can, in a direct or indirect fashion, move the meter here with respect to investment spending. But let's just say, so that's really what I explained here. Okay? Now, what I need to do is explain things for like people of Chad or the people of Rwanda who maybe don't have savings. How can you save if you only have $1,000 worth of income? How can you still get it done? Well, you want your government to encourage investment from abroad, because there's people in the United States who save money. There's people in Canada. There's people in the developed world who have money that they don't want to spend right now, and maybe you can take some of that and put it to good use. So there's 2 ways that you, as a country, can receive investment from abroad. First way is foreign direct investment. What that looks like is a company who's owned by somebody in another country. So let's just say that this is an American who's going in and building a factory in the country of Chad. It's going to be owned by a foreign entity. But that factory is going to be located in Chad. That is going to make your society more productive. Also, it could be a situation where the people of Chad own and operate a company, but they get funding from a foreign source. That's known as foreign portfolio investment. Both of these things are encouraging the formation of physical capital. It's just a question of who owns it. The foreign portfolio investment, it's still owned domestically by the people of Chad. Foreign direct investment, that's where the Americans have gone in and they own a company. This is a way that if you don't have domestic savings, how you can take foreign savings and use it for capital accumulation. Now there is a little caveat here. You want to be able to take your own savings and turn it into capital, because when you take other people's savings and turn it into capital, the returns, a lot of them are flowing back to those foreign countries. There's a healthy profit that Americans are earning, either as portfolio investment or direct investment. So that's obviously something that the people of Chad would like to avoid if they can. But if they can't, still do this. Because there's 2 huge benefits. One, it just might not be possible for you to do it. But then the next thing is right here. Those people of Chad or Rwanda are going to learn state-of-the-art processes. They're going to learn how to use these new technologies. They're going to gain human capital. They're going to take what they learn in those factories, owned by somebody else or funded by a foreign entity, and then it's going to spawn all new companies. You're going to have these spillover effects. It's going to be impossible for those foreign entities to contain that knowledge right there. Those workers are going to have ideas. They're going to go out and gain they'll find some funds and they'll start new businesses. So there's all kinds of benefits that come when you encourage investment from abroad. Okay? But the government's ability to affect things, to move the meter, to make our society more productive doesn't end there. It continues here with education. Obviously, if you have more educated people, they're going to be more productive. So if you can provide public schools and make them as good as possible, be innovative, be efficient with your time in school, and make sure kids are learning what they need to be productive citizens. So if you can get them going to college, great. Subsidize some loans. That has benefits on the back end. Education has proven to net results that are positive. Workers earn higher wages every year they go to school. But obviously, there is a little caveat here to say that when you're in school, you're not earning a wage. So be careful. More school is not for everybody. Not everybody needs to have a PhD. It's not in everybody's best interest. We already talked about that in an earlier chapter. Don't forget about opportunity cost. But if we have more educated people, we have more productive people. Another category here. We still got 5 minutes. We're going to wrap this up. So we have health and nutrition. This is a very simple fix here. How can our economy be more productive? We make them healthier. In poor countries of the world, in Chad and Rwanda, malnutrition is a huge issue. If you could just feed the people, give them more calories on a daily basis, they are going to be so much more productive. That was seen in South Korea. Over 30 years, the caloric intake rose significantly. And with that came health outcomes that are better. And with healthier citizens, you found them capable of producing at a much better rate than they ever were before. Health and nutrition are keys, particularly in today's third world, to growth in the future. Okay? Now, again, it still doesn't stop there. A government can do all of those things, but it still needs to do these very simple ones. Remember that the cornerstone, literally the cornerstone of a market economy is a government that protects this. This is the key to capitalism. People have to have the right to own property. And the government needs to be able to protect that property. Otherwise, our market economy will not run efficiently. So a government can contribute to a productive society if it does a great job of protecting property rights. Very simply here, a government that has a justice system that is corrupt, where judges take bribes, where public officials, in order to approve contracts, need a handout. When contracts that are in place are not enforced by a government, you're going to find that economy struggling mightily. This is one of the reasons why America does a good job of producing goods and services. We have a justice system and a government that isn't corrupt, particularly relative to the rest of the world. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Today is a perfect example that the government is not always efficient. But compared to the rest of the world, we do a pretty darn good job of making sure that our economy can run smoothly, that property rights are protected. And the last thing here is that if you have a country that is constantly changing, where the government that exists today is not the one that exists tomorrow because of some forced coup, where you have some military or militant wing take over, and there's all this constant change, you're going to find that property rights are not protected. There's looting everywhere. Businesses aren't thriving. In fact, they're closing their doors and saying it's not worth the risk. I don't know if this business is going to be here tomorrow, so I don't take that risk. With no new risks, people are not going to see their lives improving. Productivity is going to grind to a halt. That society will not improve. Very simple things here are so absolutely essential to growth. Okay? This is that last thing that I mentioned, that crime piece. When people fear their capital may be stolen by criminals or confiscated by a corrupt government, they're not going to take that risk. No one's ever going to go into a country where it's lawless, because they're not going to earn a return, because the business is going to be theirs tomorrow. They're looking for stability. They're looking for an efficient government. They're looking for a healthy society where law enforcement does their job, where court systems honor contracts, and the Constitution that exists today is going to be the one that exists tomorrow. All those things are looked for. And then finally here, we just have a couple of minutes. Free trade. Free trade is going to be a good thing. Remember that production possibilities frontier. Remember that what an economy produces is not necessarily what they can consume. We can consume outside our production possibilities frontier if we focus in on that which we are best at, which we have a comparative advantage at, and what we trade for the others. So don't have inward policies where we throw up tariffs or barriers to other countries coming in and involving themselves. Look outward. Invite countries to come in. Have free trade. Bring down those barriers. Encourage investment. Integrate yourself with the world economy. Yes, you're becoming interdependent, but you're going to have standards of living rising in your economy, in your country, excuse me. Free trade is one of the most proven things that helps societies out. Okay? Countries that look inward have generally failed to create growth. like Argentina in the 20th century. So almost done here. We're almost at 25 minutes. So the last thing we can do, we're going to be done in the next 2 minutes. I'm sorry, it's going to go 27 minutes, not 25. Research and development. Remember, the biggest thing about driving growth is getting technological progress. Okay? What we need then is to find ways to encourage this. Well, if we have firms that are doing a whole lot of research and development and not being complacent with what we have today, but changing that product and making it even better tomorrow, that's going to be a great thing. Alright? Knowledge that is created by one person is going to be shared freely. That knowledge is going to become what's called a public good, or is what's called a public good. So if we can get people creating new knowledge, doing research and development to make our lives better, that's going to make it's going to make a huge impact, because that knowledge is impossible to contain. So here are some things that are hugely important. If you want to drive growth, give people a tax break to do that research and development. Okay, so back to our discussion question. I do apologize about going over. We were almost at 25 minutes, now we're at 26. If you look at these things, it says, which of the following policies do you think would be the most effective at boosting growth and living standards in a poor country? If we offer tax incentives for investment by local firms, is that going to do it? Absolutely, that's going to drive growth. If we offer tax incentives for foreign firms, is that going to do it? Absolutely. If we're choosing between the two, do the local firms, because foreign firms, monies are going out of your country. So if you have the ability to fund it yourself, fund it yourself. If we give cash payments for good school attendance, is that going to do things? Absolutely. That encourages human capital formation. If we crack down on those who are corrupt, is that going to do it? Absolutely. If we restrict imports to protect domestic industries, no. Don't engage in protectionism. Open up your country to the world and you'll find living standards rising. If you allow free trade, you're going to have rising standards of living. And if you give away free condoms, what you're going to do is you're going to reduce disease incidence. You're going to make your economy more productive, because they're going to be healthier. And they're not going to be multiplying like rabbits here. Population growth eats into all of those productivity gains. So with condoms given away and used, you're going to find population doesn't grow as rapidly, so the productivity gains stay, and you're going to find a healthier population more capable of producing goods and services. This is your conclusion. Take a second to look at it. That's what we're going to do in the next chapter. We're going to talk about savings and investment. We're going to have a graph for you. Sorry. That's all. Go fill out the response form. I do apologize about the 27 minutes as opposed to the 25.